Welcome all, and thanks for tuning in to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. You're listening to part 3 of the brewery equipment and sourcing segment. In today's episode, I chat with Julian Sanders from Spark Breweries and Distilleries based in Melbourne, Victoria. Now, Spark started providing services to the brewery industry back in 2014, who primarily provide systems from 5 hectolitres right up to the production scale 80 hectolitre brewhouses. Having a background in engineering and commerce, Julian honed in on his craft and vision for what has become the modern day Spark business by spending some time over in the UK absorbing their real ale culture while doing some practical engineering by day. He then found his way back to Oz, studying everything craft beer. He even became a beer judge and helped at various beer events, so it was only natural that he'd combine these two passions to become a brewery and distillery design engineer. Spark started making a bit of noise in both the Australian market and international ones after developing a snug, low footprint, 2-vessel stackable brewhouse system called the SPARK K500, which he earned an international patent for, which has become a hit to the brewpubs of this world, supplying 5-hec and 10-hec systems in this compact model to nano breweries for pubs, clubs, cafes, and even the avid keen homebrewer with big garages. Julian provides some great insights on what brewery model concepts that neatly tie into the decisions that you can then make on the types of systems and equipment you should be looking for. Having been involved in over 40 brewery installs in his career in the industry, Julian is very well placed to provide aspiring brewery owners advice and perspectives on what to consider when purchasing equipment for their brewery. So I hope you all enjoy my chat with Julian Sanders from Spark Breweries and Distilleries. Welcome, Julian, to the Build Me Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, mate. Glad that we're able to actually finally line up some time. I think we were meant to record this just before Christmas, but it sounds like it's been a busy period for you leading up to Christmas and New Year. How's business?
Well, we're in business. We're still here after the nightmare of 2020, and that's as much as could be expected. So we're very grateful that we made it through. The first half of the year was terrifying, and since then we're lucky enough that our reputation and our sales pipelines carried us through, and we're going well now. We've got some good work on. But you did right, mate. The December thing, when everybody else in the world stops their day jobs, that's when they want to talk about breweries. So the holiday phase is a really busy one for us, because not only do we have new sales inquiries where people want to learn what's involved in building a craft brewery, we actually are usually delivering all of the projects that have had time overruns where people want the system in November, ready to launch for summer, and we're still installing them in December and January.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And I work in the recruitment space for civil construction, and when COVID had hit Australia back in, when was it, late March, April, all the projects were still sort of humming along. So construction kept us going for a few months, but then all the new ones coming online and things being stuck in the planning process and whether they're going to pull the trigger, that's started to sort of slow down. And we saw a massive lull between probably June, July, right up to Christmas, but hoping for a better 2021 year, actually.
I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm always looking for the silver lining and looking at what we can do instead of moaning about what we can't. And although in general, it's a horrendous situation, there is a lot of opportunities for people that want to pro-brew. It's never been easier to get a good value lease on a property or buy a property.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point as well.
For all the pubs that are closed, it's like, guys, you're closed and the government's just given you an instant asset write-down. Put a brewery in and be a brewery, not a pub. So
yeah. Well, commercial real estate must be really hurting right now because of the whole work from home model. All these companies are starting to discover its potential and definite possibility for their workforce, which they never probably considered before COVID. So,
well, I guess my solution for that is if you look at the property value of the actual underlying asset of, whether it's commercial or retail property or a pub asset, it's a property asset. The technology, the brewing kit that we design, being compact and inexpensive and easy to use, just maximizes the value of that property asset by putting the land to the highest value use.
Yeah, well, and that's something I want to dive into, because obviously some of the product offerings and a kit that you do provide is geared towards some of those small footprint breweries, brew pub type models. So really like to dive into some of those different systems that you manufacture and install. So I've already given the audience a bit of a rundown about yourself, and your name's actually appeared on a couple other episodes in the podcast so far. I had Jason Bayless from Red Windows Capital, who is somewhat of a preferred financing option for some of the equipment that you guys provide. And I'm sure that people listening, avid brewery enthusiasts, probably come across your products and services and equipment in the past. But really like to get to know you a bit better and get an understanding of how you got into what you're doing now in the brewery equipment sourcing. And it's not just the brewery side, is it? It's, distilling as well. And just run us through how you got a passion for what you're doing and how you came to where you are now.
Yeah, good question. It's been a while since I've unpacked it and thought back. And we've been here a while now. We launched Spark in 2014. And to my knowledge, I'm the only engineer that designs equipment in the market here. There are lots of people that trade. They run a business where they buy something in one place and they sell it in another, or they act as a distributor for someone else's equipment. But the fact that I legitimately design machines, I think, is pretty unusual in the space. But my background's in economics and in engineering, and I worked as a consultant in the UK and in Australia in large professional food and bev companies. And my wife is a wine merchant. So when we were in London, she learned a lot about tasting, and I got to help do that. Tuesday night, row of all these different wines, doing the formal sensory training.
Oh, yep.
And at the time, this is 08, 09 kind of era. At the time, there wasn't a lot outside America in craft beer where beer was legitimized as a proper profession and a legitimate area of interest. Last century, it was kind of downtrodden, as we all know, to a commodity. And when we moved back to Australia, I lived in a shack in Hervey Bay for a year, and I just read a ton of brew science, did a ton of brewing, built a timber boat. And I kind of only lasted 8 months, if I'm honest, living in a shack in Queensland before I moved back to our hometown of Melbourne with our first child on the way, who's now 7, and the idea for this business. I think I really like small business. So I've worked in really big global companies, and I've operated my own businesses. Spark, in fact, is the third of mine that I've started over time. And Upflow Zero Alcohol Brewing Company is my fourth. It's going really well. So my heart is realistically, supporting small independent business doing well. And so I see my role when we moved back to Australia. I thought I want to do something cultural. I want to play to my advantages. I know I'll engineer some brewing systems as a tool maker, and then I can have the fun of putting these systems in, helping people be successful, sharing the benefit with them, and then watching what happens. So I've got this kind of cool stance on the industry, Chris. I make a machine, I put it in, support everybody, and then I've got, at this point, there's 46 businesses around Australia that are using our equipment. And so I've got 46 family friends all over the country who I could drop in with, I could call, they call me. And it's just feel really sort of privileged and blessed to be able to work that well connected with such a really vibrant, interesting kind of industry.
Yeah, excellent. And any favorite breweries that you've come across as well? Like to hear what beer styles you tend to lean to as well.
Oh, good question. That's a really good question.
No one's actually really wanted to take the gambit and actually say who their favorite brewery is when they work in the brewing industry. It's like,
really?
Favorites. Yeah. So, it's really interested to hear what favorite breweries that you tend to always go to the bottle shop fridge for all the time.
I'll tell you one good saying. It's like people say there's no such thing as a good wine in general. There's only a good bottle of wine because there's some inherent variability in wine. Yeah. I think, okay, here we go. I'm happy to nominate favorite breweries. There's a lot. Every year I go to America. Every normal year we're allowed out of the country, I go to America. The big craft brewers conference, and toured extensively all over Pacific Northwest and Portland and California to, looking at breweries and understanding the processes and the equipment, and the same in Europe and the UK. So, wow, I've seen a heck of a lot of traditional breweries on the continent in Germany and Belgium and in the UK that are traditional ale or lager breweries. And I've seen a heck of a lot of modern craft. And this whole sector's grown out of the States since homebrewing was legalized in Cali in the 70s.
Mm.
So I don't know. Matt Brynildson, 805 and Firestone Walker. I have a lot of respect for what he's done with his business partners there. In terms of playing favourite breweries, actually, Bear Republic in Hillsburg, up in Wine District in California, is my favourite because of their stout. I swear they use like a molasses as an adjunct to get pretty high gravity. It's about an 8 ABV roasty.
Yep.
And I dig that beer. So yeah, if I got a peg of it, their IPA is a superlative as well. I really like ferment character. So anything that's about process control rather than just ingredients,
Yeah.
So it's pretty sophisticated beers that have simple ingredients like Saisons and Belgians. And Beer Republic, if anyone gets a chance to go hit them up in their brew pub in Cali, Beer Republic have great IPAs that include some ferment character from some estery yeast strains along with hopping. Really tastefully done.
And it seems to be, and we've spoken about it on some of the other episodes so far, it's sort of adopted this hop craze over in Australia, and the yeast character of beer tends to be not always brought up, or it's somewhat forgotten. It's all about hops and how much it's been dry hopped. Or Neil Cameron, who was on an earlier segment, basically talked about yeast is the next thing over here. That's the next unique yeast driven beers is probably the next thing to go crazy over in Australia, in his opinion.
It's up to each individual brewery to define their own character, and the way they do that is by doing something that no one else does. And there's a huge amount of space that hasn't been explored in what you can do with flavors in Australia with beer. Huge amount.
Yeah,
I think part of my job is to not be judgmental about beer styles or about beer preferences, and just take a clinical professional view on sensory analysis and tasting and beer judging, so that I can support people in finding their own feet. I can skill them up with the tasting they need, a bit of education on historical styles, so they know what the color palette that they're brewing with is. And then with the machines that we make, our role is to maximize that color palette, so they've got the best, most comfortable process control, so they can produce unique products. But yeast and yeast strains is a big unexplored area, and right there, it's a great proprietary difference, isn't it? If you want your own fingerprint on each of your beers, you could have 10 beers in 10 styles, and they've all got the same sub-threshold ester and phenol profile from your proprietary yeast. Right there is going to be a house character.
Well, that's what will set you apart, isn't it? For becoming a very competitive market craft over here, and and the one thing to set you apart, everyone's trying to create a certain style, and they're probably using similar malts and similar hops, and you don't really have a lot of control over what you get from your suppliers, what you're given. But one thing that can set you apart, your beers, and make them very unique is creating your own yeast strains and sort of harvesting it over a period of time to sort of make it uniquely yours.
It's true. And there's a phase of exuberance that people go through on their journey where they go deep craft, and anything that they can do, they do to be the most different and to be the most extreme and to really be to break new ground and to do things people have never been before. But the commercial reality is that we're an unusual industry, that we really, really lead the demand profile. So what people are buying in shops and what people want, if you're homebrewing, it's like being a fine artist. It's your prerogative to do whatever the heck you like. You write a poem, put it under your pillow, go to sleep, And the same with homebrewing, brew anything you like, not a problem. But intrinsically, if you're a professional brewery and you're selling beer, you're asking people for money for that product. Now, inherent in that is a responsibility that you're doing it for them and not for you. So one of the strengths of craft is the fact that we can actually put our own personal spin on what we do and have our own distinctive beers. It's also important to balance that with the commercial reality that you have to give customers what they want and get beyond yourself and grow out of it being about you. The old classic things people say about, we brew what we like and drink as much as we can and sell the rest. And it's sort of not that funny anymore. People really, we Spark deal strictly with professional brewers, and that means they're making money, And you get a lot of people at homebrew and call up and say, I want a brewery. It's like, well, yeah, I want a Ferrari. It doesn't make it happen. You've got to respect the fact that you're brewing beers for other people, and you've got to focus on selling beer. There's a lot of people that can brew that would think that the world would owe them a living doing that. And unfortunately, we're all in the industry. Our job in the industry is selling beer. So yeah, I mean, I do agree that it's a big strength, but it's also important to just keep a bit of commercial reality about what people are going to pay you to do as well. And I think something that helped me a lot in the early days was, I forget, someone had described the fact that very often companies are doing one thing commercially, I'd say Pickstone and Wood and Pacific Ale, and then they're talking about something different. And what they talk about would be their Stein beer. So there are things that are done for marketing reasons to position your brand and to communicate and to generate interesting content for people. But that's not to say that 99% of your production isn't the core thing that's working.
Yeah.
One example I think of some Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and when I first tasted it, he'd been doing it for 30 years. It blew me away. So he'd been doing the same beer for 30 years, dialing it in, and then after 30 years, someone on the far side of the planet first tastes that beer. Now, he didn't get sick of doing it after 3 months and go and brew a triple Russian Imperial Stout. You got to sit behind the core things because these are big and deep markets.
I only just came across Sierra Nevada only a couple of years ago. Like I tried so many years to get my hands on it, but it's, Penrith's only starting to get a couple of craft beer shops, and I was able to, Bucket Boys and even BWS are starting to stock them now. So it's interesting how far craft beer is starting to make a push over here. So
they're titans just because of their focus on quality. Yeah. One of the interesting things about the American landscape is that beer is very cheap over there. So no one brews for economic reasons at home. So you get engineers typically who brew for beer geek reasons. And that's a good thing. They've got a big skill set in America of tricky home brewing that allows them to be able to commercially start a whole ton of breweries. And in Australia, because beer is relatively expensive, because of the oligopoly last century with tacit collusion and big brewing companies keeping off each other's turf and elevating the price of beer, we have relatively expensive beer, and so people do brew for economic reasons. So some proportion of the brew skill base in Australia, it was more of an issue 5, 6, 7 years ago than it is now, because there's a lot of good TAFE courses and there's a lot of cross-pollination between Australia and the States. And so our brewing skill set in the economy is in a world of different place now than it was 5 years ago. But we're sort of coming from different places, and that traditionally people in Australia and America brew for different reasons.
Well, love to dive into more about what you do, Julian, and Spark Breweries and Distilleries. Like I mentioned earlier, giving the audience a bit of a rundown of your services, and people will possibly come across you guys as well with the number of installations and brewery installs that you've done over the years. But tell us a bit more about Spark and the different, products and services you offer.
Oh, sure thing. Spark supplies brewing equipment and distilling equipment. And I'll speak to the brewing side of the business. It's the majority of what we do, and it's probably what most listeners are interested in. Our product range falls into 2-vessel, 3-vessel, 4-vessel, 5-vessel systems that are traditional manufacturing breweries. And that's what Germans and the Americans do, and that's what 99% of equipment suppliers do. And that equipment suits a manufacturing business model. And the other side of our product range are the compact systems that I designed 4 years ago. I got awarded a global patent, and it's a compact, inexpensive plug-and-play machine. It's the first thing in the world that's designed specifically for people who sell beer already. It's a pub brewery that you can retrofit to an existing pub.
So you're saying that most of the products that you're putting out in the market, are they more of your big brewery installs, or is brew pubs starting to become a bit of a sweet spot for you guys?
Yeah, it is, and I call it the legacy market. For big manufacturing breweries is this the vast majority of the work that we've done to date, and it's great. I really like those projects. They're big, slow, long, heavy projects where I can do engineering design work, which I enjoy doing. But for sure, at the moment and in future, compact systems it's the future of the industry.
Well, from a lot of my guests I've had on the podcast so far, we've talked a lot about site location being a really important aspect in the beginning when it comes to opening a brewery. I mean, poor site selection can lead to a shopping list of problems down the track, especially if you're looking at expanding and what you'd want to do down the track. And can you talk us through what people need to be considering when picking the right site? So it's, in relation to equipment.
It is. You're dead right. It's a really key determinant of success. It's a really pivotal decision for site. Mm-hmm. The first thing is you got to pick a business model. Are you brew and serve on site like a brew pub, or are you a manufacturing brewery? And to the extent that you can focus on one or the other, you can smash it out of the park. You can absolutely optimize and deliver a plan with a brewing system that wins, And I tell this to everybody, and they say, "Yeah, but I want a little bit of both, of course," and that's okay. But it's important to focus on what business you're in and do a very good job of that. I think part of the problem with shopping for a site is that people go around, they look at sites and they try them on and they try and sort of imagine what kind of brewery would be there. And it's really putting the cart before the horse. It's much better for you to have a plan, understand clearly what your plan is, and then go and find a site that delivers your plan for you. Otherwise, you're always trying to post-rationalize or retrofit or, it's way more bodgy if you just have a site first and then try and work out what you could do with it. Certainly the people I've seen that have been very successful understand clearly what they're trying to do before they try and do it.
Yeah, so concept is obviously, when we've talked about this topic before, figuring out what type of brewery you want to be will then lead you into thinking, well, what sort of site do I pick? And then with that site, you can then determine what size equipment or type of equipment, what sort of arrangement. Is it a 2-vessel, 3 or 4 vessel? Is your intentions just to sell beer in a pub and takeaways, or is it to get big and eventually and be in the bottle shops and with large distributors?
That's a great way to understand site selection through those two business models. Yeah. So the first one, manufacturing beer is a high volume, low margin business where you're distribution brewing. And so a site for that might be a 500 square meter industrial site. You don't mind where it is as long as it gets planning consent to have a brewery and it's got the utilities that you need.
Yep.
So you run it around the clock.
Yep.
The kind of equipment that suits those are a 2-vessel, 3-vessel, 4-vessel, for big ones, steam rather than being direct electric or gas. And the point is that you can have low unit cost beer. So you start off and you start growing your sales and you start producing to match your sales, and you can relatively inexpensively expand and be able to brew even back-to-back brew shifts in a day, 16 hours. So we had a quad batch. And so that business model, you can see straight away why the site selection has to align with the business model. If your aim is to brew beer that's going to be distributed, because you have a lower margin on your product when you're selling at wholesale than you do when you're retailing it. And so you want to have a much larger volume, much larger. Put simply, you need to do 5 times the volume in distribution to make the same money that you do on your own taps. That rule of thumb just indicates the relative price points between the cost of beer is for you to brew, your cost of goods, the price that you achieve selling a wholesale keg, and the price that you achieve selling a retail keg on draft, pint by pint. Yeah. So 5 times the volume out in distribution of slinging kegs wholesale makes you the same money if you did, the fifth of that volume in your own tap room. And that's really drives home that point that you want to be focusing on one or the other as a clear priority.
And that's an interesting point you bring up. And the first time I've heard that statement, I love it when people bring those sort of figures up, those stats. And it just, Pete from Wayward had a couple, he was the first one that brought up about, to be a production brewery, a profitable one, you need to be doing at least 1 million litres a year or 1.5 million if you're in the Sydney region. But when you say about brew pub volume versus production volume being, 5 times more on the production side, I've heard a lot of stories from brewers and successful breweries, especially in the inner west, who started out as brew pubs, but have expanded into the production side as well and sort of have that hybrid model going on. You know what I mean? So is what you're saying is that if someone wants to just start out as a brew pub, but maybe have ambitions of, if the demand is good, the beer's good, the brand's good, profits are, and cash flows coming in, and maybe a couple of years down the track, you have a space that you can expand in, that where you can increase production up to that 5 multiplier. Is that some advice that you would probably endorse?
Absolutely. I think that starting soon, starting small and starting profitable is the best first step, because if you win that, and you're in business, you're making money. And if you achieve that, you have a bigger range of better options next. There are people that start a brew pub and then go into building a big distribution brewery. And there are big distribution breweries that decide that the best way ahead is to open more brew pubs. And a good way to look at it is, we've looked at the site selection that you'd choose in an industrial area as an example for a distribution brewery. Often you have those, and there'll be a brewery that has a tap room in it. It's like a brewery with a pub. And then the other one that we should talk about with site selection is is a pub that has a brewery in it, and that's where the most of the use and most of the floor area is taken up by bended elbows, punters, neck and pints. And in that situation, you get a limited volume because you can only fit so many people in there, and the absolute capital value of that business is the bums on seats. It's the licensed number of punters that are in there on New Year's Eve. And in that situation, you don't have to do as much volume. You don't need to sell as much beer to be solidly in business because you have a much, much higher margin. You're brewing for, I don't know what, $75, which is ingredients and small brewers excise, plus labour cost. What you're selling for $1,000 is a keg. And the reason that business model is a good one to start on is you can have infinite infill all over the country of small independent breweries that are running that business model and are doing 10 kegs a week. It's easily achievable on every corner of every block of every town. Whereas there's just pushback on the fight for taps. If you don't own your own taps, then there's increasing price competition in the market for distribution, and that becomes a game of capital where the well-funded big brewing companies that have marketing budgets and low unit cost of production win the battle for taps.
Yeah.
So the sort of sites, there's a large number of sites. You mentioned a few in your intro with the change in the retail property landscape through COVID that, I've seen pizza shops turn into breweries. I've seen just literally commercial 2-zoned retail shops be used as brew pubs. Of course, if you actually get a pub and buy an existing license, then that substantially de-risks it because all you need to do is turn your flow across to your own brewery. And the BrewStack machines are designed exactly for that because they're compact. They just give the maximum amount of floor area for people in the venue, and they're just easy to use for consistent high quality beer and really easy to install.
Yeah, it's a stacker type model where is it like a 2 vessel? Is that it? Those brew pub ones? Is it the K5 and K10 or?
That's right. Yeah, K5, K10. There's a K2 for izakaya in Japan, and there's a gas-fired K15 for Texas. Yep. So that the machine's been really successful in its target market. People are using them and doing really well. We've got one in Kalgoorlie, one in Karratha, one in Toowoomba. Yeah, I think there's somewhere between 12 and 15 installed and operating around the country at the moment. We haven't started marketing it yet, really, just because we've spent the last 4 years developing it technically. I probably took a little bit too far. But you're right, Chris, it's a 2-vessel system, and the lower vessel has a heating jacket that gives you the benefits of steam. You can step mash, and you have a gentle but quite powerful heating for the boil. But you don't need to buy a steam boiler or worry about the certification or the dangers involved with that. So it's a very inexpensive and easy to install, safe system that's technically superior to other things that are on the market.
Yeah, I've seen. I think when I was in the Rocks and I was looking through the window. This is in the height of COVID in Sydney, but I wasn't able to go in. But the Endeavor Brew Pub in the Rocks, I think they've got your
That's
system.
right.
Yeah,
they do. And isn't that a gorgeous? It must be one of the oldest buildings in the country.
It is. It must be reinstated. A real pricey bit of real estate. That I tell you,
it's phenomenal. And had Heritage Carpenters put the whole wall of that building back in after the brewery equipment had gone in. But it's stunning. It's stunning. It is nice that small machine ends up in some really gorgeous places on South Bank in Melbourne. Yeah, it's like a dream come true as an engineer to design a machine with a blank sheet of paper. And I've still got my original development sketch of it to be awarded a patent, which is very difficult. America fell into place and South Korea, it's in 12 different countries, well, geographies around the world, including, Europe being one geography. And be able to actually, more importantly, commercialize it where it does offer value that's unique to the people who use it. It's been a really, really fantastic experience for me.
We talked a bit about, I guess, the considerations for site selection and all that, and we've had other guests come on and talk a bit about, some of the other considerations. So some of the overlooked things that tend to not come into mind when people are doing site selection. I've heard people not even considering their ceiling heights, not even knowing if they can get a pallet of cans through the door, or what are some of the common things or what stories that you've seen or heard in your brewery install days? I'm sure you've got a few.
I've got a few. You're not wrong, mate. Wow. I mean, it's just all about forethought and planning. And here's the funny thing, having gone and built nigh on 50 of these now, we know what's going to happen ahead of it happening. I think just the benefit of experience is that almost anything can be made to work, but there's always a trade-off and a balanced set of compromises. So the process that Spark apply when somebody fronts up and says, hey, I'm interested in building a brewery, how much does it cost and what do we do? What we do is, is we ask them what it is that they are trying to achieve and what they want. And that they have to do a bit of soul searching. And in deciding that, it's a sort of painful and slow, long process. We often talk with people for a year before a project starts. And all of these things like site selection or equipment selection or business plan or marketing or brand, they're all just artifacts of them finding their own sense of self and then designing their own brewery that reflects them. So it sort of is personal. So I don't apply generic advice. We work with people to ensure that they're successful. That's our goal is, I'm not a marketing guy. What our company's weakest at is marketing. My sneaky plan is do a really good, honourable job, have a whole lot of really successful clients, and then we look the biz. And it seems to be working.
Yeah, well, you've got some great content on your website. I think that's how I first came across you guys, actually. I was the obvious typical Google question is, how do you build a brewery? And I think you guys, some of your content and articles on your website, I think you've got some stuff on Radio Brews News as well. And yeah, you guys seem to rank pretty high on that. So, and delivered
thanks
some
for
great
the feedback.
content.
Yeah, that's good. That's encouraging for me. And we did get time in COVID to do a bit more of that stuff, but it's always the lowest on my priorities because I'm always answering the phone or helping people. But I'll take that on board and I'll just try and budget a bit more time and try and get some more information down. The Spark Academy that we'll talk in more detail about later is a great, it's like getting the information out of our head, our team of 4 of us, and getting it down in a format that's easily digestible to help people make these decisions for themselves so they know what the options are and then they can take time to decide. I think one really great way of understanding what your own brewery can be is to go to other people's breweries. That's the first thing everyone wants to do. And so the Spark Stories is another forthcoming part of our website where we just, through the lens of our customers, describe what they do, why, what works, what they learned. But yeah, I've got, and they're each different. So I could tell you 50 different stories about things that weren't expected. My one generic comment on site selection would be that prior planning prevents poor performance kind of deal. If you think things through and you have the right people working with you in the site selection phase, then you close out all the risk early on. And a lot of that's to do with the sunk cost of fit out and the nature of the lease term. So we'll talk more about that when I detail how a brewery project goes down.
Well, talking a bit about what makes a brewery in relation to the equipment side, can you tell us some of the minimum expectations you would find in a brew house and all the different systems and designs that I guess suit different models, the brew pub model and the production side?
There's a few key differences. So without getting into the specifics, it's probably worth mentioning that a multi-vessel traditional manufacturing brew house, the point of having multi-vessels is that it reduces the average duration of a batch. So you can sequence beers through, rolling continuous kind of style. And that's quite different to a batch on a small system that's a pub system, where your labour cost is not nearly so important. Your cost of beer doesn't matter because the margin's so high. What matters is that you can market, you can attract more people. So yeah, I think the key things to look for when you're shopping for brewery equipment are find something obviously that is compliant with the Australian standards. It's legal. And what that means is that the pressure vessels and the electrical systems are designed and built to the Australian standards. Spark Systems have a digital control system that we build in Melbourne. It's assembled from components all around the world. And that is a good example of something that's very easy and cheap to get installed and get operating. And then you don't face any risk as a director of a brewing company for industrial accidents because you were not compliant. To have valid insurance and to be safe practically, but also, the legal risk of operating a business that harms people. When people get into pro brewing from home brewing, they sort of need to get their head around the fact that there's only one way to do it, and that's properly. So looking for Australian standard compliant equipment is important. And I think warranty is also super important. We offer a 5-year warranty on all of our systems, and that's because we've learned by experiment, we help people out of warranty voluntarily all the time because it helps them. Like, it's just in a karmic sense worth it in the long run. It's not much out of our day and spare parts here and there. It doesn't cost us much at all. everything that we do is dedicated to getting a large number of good, successful little small breweries. And that's what we focus on. We don't worry so much about us. It's about putting the customer's business and their beer ahead of ourselves. Anyway, so that, I don't know whether that's if that's an unusual perspective or an unusual attitude, but that's the way we roll.
From stories I've heard of people purchasing things from overseas, like, your Chinese manufacturers, is, a lot of people will know that you're probably going to get a cheaper system. The cost of labor is significantly reduced when you engage someone over in those Asian markets like China. But the thing that I hear a lot in some horror stories is people do the deal, they front up the cash and they get their system, but the support, the background support and getting them on the phone and being able to resolve problems on brew days or bottling days or whatever, it seems to be very daunting to know that, you'd be put in that position. You haven't got local support or even support here in Australia to get someone on the phone at, the same time zone as you. And I've heard that it is getting better, and it's not with every Chinese manufacturer or supplier, but depends on if you haven't done your due diligence with the supplier that you're getting your equipment from. But customer service and also service support is very important to me if I'm going to purchase a $100,000-$200,000 piece of equipment. So,
and that's, to an extent, it's about professionalism. People often come to us and they say, their kind of thinking is, how much does this cost and what can I afford? And we say, no. Once you're in business, businesses have leverage. They have debt, they borrow money, and then it's not about what you can afford and how much does this cost. It's what return on the investment can I achieve. And this is a really important mindset that you have to adopt. When you buy on price, it probably doesn't represent value in the long run. People who haven't operated professional breweries don't rate the importance of uptime, of reliability. But if you short orders in the trade and you don't supply, you will never get those contracts back again. You don't win those taps again. If you can't supply what you've offered, it's hugely damaging to your opportunity. Vastly more than the cost. And brewing, like any business, is solidly profitable. And the upside potential for what you could do on a reliable system is hugely more valuable than the cost of the equipment in the first place. So I'm forever trying to get this into people's heads that buying a brewery in a box is not the same as ending up with a successful brewing business. And Spark delivers successful brewing businesses.
Yeah, so purchasing a turnkey system, and then freight comes, gets delivered, you get your trades in to install it. You guys are they're purchasing it from you. Parts of it are manufactured. Is majority of the equipment manufactured here in Australia, or is some of it sort of outsourced overseas?
We get stuff from all over the world. Yeah. There are, if you sat through the federal government's talks on manufacturing, production is one of 5 stages of manufacturing. It's R&D and design, and as you say, customer service. That's all manufacturing business. And the production of steel is in mainland China for Spark equipment. We have a really very honourable and very, very consistent, high quality trade relationship that we've built over many years, and we know that we're building business together in the long run. So they look after us. There's no Friday afternoon breweries when it comes to Spark, because it's easier for them to be consistent and precise with quality, which is just second to none. We pay more money than we have to for all of the inputs in our business to make sure that nothing goes wrong. We've learned by experience that it's best for everybody in the long run. We have Hungarian grain mills, Austrian digital PLCs, the touchscreen controllers, German chillers, American pumps. So we pick and choose modern manufacturing. You pick and choose components and you configure them and you design them into a system that you supply to people with a warranty that you can then, you know that it's going to be able to be installed on time and budget. It's going to work. You can answer the phone, back it up, send parts out, help them with any questions. It gives them a huge amount of confidence that their business is going to be successful.
Well, you've said earlier that you've done about 50 brewery installs since, what are we saying, 2014 being the origin of all
19th of December 2014, I signed first contract. It's true.
Wow. And so out of those 50 installs, I'm sure you've able to tell the audience, I guess, how a brewery build or install actually goes down in real time. And
yeah, that's what we like. Now we're talking.
Yeah. So tell us what how that all goes, and potential things that can go wrong, and what opportunities might exist.
Well, there's this education and sales phase, which is what I've spent some fair proportion of the last 10 years doing, which is a bit kind of it's gone past in a blur. And that's what we've been talking about so far. At some point, they've got a site, they've got a business plan, and they understand what they're doing and why, and they give us a green light. They sign a contract and then just pay a 20% deposit. The standard, most Spark systems are supplied on a lease to own. And that's good, because we should mention that actually. Like the way finance gets people in business properly is that it allows them to focus their resources on the critical success factor of selling beer and picking the right site and partnering with the right equipment supplier. And they just pay the system off over 5 years as a monthly operating lease. And one keg of revenue, $1,000 a week, is the lease on a K5 system with a range of tanks that can brew 40 kegs a week. So you don't need to sell very much to more than cover the costs of the brewing system. Yeah. And that's the key mindset change we're always trying to get into people's heads, that no one has $200,000 to go drop on a brewery. Some people do try and raise capital and do that, but most people would be well advised to absolutely lease the equipment so that they can focus on success and not undercook it. Get them on a decent, have a contingency in the budget, focus on selling beer and just absolutely smash it. And then, they pay the whole brewery off inside a year. It's a phenomenal return on investment brewing. It's good news. So that completely just doesn't answer your question, which was, well, how does a brewery install look like? So having done all the business planning and finance stuff, most people order equipment at the same time that they make a planning application. They're fairly confident they'll get that planning consent, or that they'd put a brewery into another site otherwise. Some people spend 6 months getting planning permission, and then they order equipment, and it takes another 4 months for equipment to be delivered. So our lead time is typically between 4 and 6 months, depending on the size and complexity of the system. Mm. We're pretty quick, and we're brutally consistent with that too. We actually completely deliver in time. While most of the important work on site happens while we're fabricating the brewing system, building the controls, and that's the site fit out. And the site fit out falls into 3 major components: the flooring work, the drains, the flooring. That's the biggest sunk cost, and people could budget between 10 and 30 grand depending on the size and shape of the brewery. And then there's plumbing and electrical, and those trade components, they proceed. Some of it is done before the brewery equipment arrives, and then once the containers drop on the ground, tanks get slung into place by riggers or by the brewers themselves, and the electrical and plumbing is clipping the tanks in, and then you're into the cleaning and the commissioning and the production.
Yeah, floors has come up quite a bit on this podcast so far. We haven't dived into very detailed specifics. I've had the Rocks Brewery guys over in Alexandria talk a bit about, epoxy versus brewer tiles, and then we've talked a bit about slot drains and all that. Are you able to talk us through some of the probably some of the ones that you would prefer, or that would make a brewery owner's life easier in terms of what they go with?
Oh, the flooring's a great example where we can add a lot of value by just taking out cost, just minimizing the amount of the pour, the falls, screeding it flat so it doesn't pool, bunding, surface finishes. There's a whole lot of detail there that we just live and breathe, so we take for granted. Trade waste, getting the trade waste ticket from the EPA with a settling tank. You can adjust your pH and let the effluent cool off before you dump it. People sort of struggle to get compliance or to see how they're going to comply. Whereas if they work with us, they get a drawing that shows exactly what the equipment is. They shows the authority that they've got an operating procedure as to how to use their trade waste system, and it just sails straight through. So we save people from a huge number of problems that they don't even realize that they're going to hit at the outset. I just forget to tell people about it. It's the marketing thing again. But yeah, the flooring's one aspect, and once the equipment arrives on site, because we supply everything you need and a really good installation and operations manual, it makes it possible to get the trades easily. You can find trades, you can show them this engineering scope of works, the install manual. They can see exactly what they need to do, how long it's going to take them, how much materials they're going to need to supply. And that means A, they'll be able to sharpen the pencil and give you a good quote to do it. And B, they will bother to turn up. If you give them a big box of bits and say, I don't know what this is either, can you work out how to control it and please install it for me? It suddenly gets really expensive and really time consuming. Yeah. So a huge proportion of the value that we add to customers is in the installation documents that we provide, and the support through the installation management and project management just ensures that things go in cheap and quick.
So people have the option of, when they are looking at engaging with you and they want to go ahead with purchasing one of your systems, they can choose to just purchase the equipment, gets delivered, and they then take on that responsibility of sourcing someone else to install it, or, who knows, maybe they're handy enough and they can do a lot of it themselves. Or they can sort of engage the services arm of Spark to get a project manager or a foreman on site to help guide them through the installation and go into a lot more of the brewery fit out. Is that right?
What we do is kind of the best of both worlds. So we give the customer the benefit of, we don't charge a markup on trade work. We don't act as a contractor for installation. And that's in the customer's interests, because it's cheap and quick for them to get the thing installed and running. There's so much work that needs to happen on site, they may as well use those same trades to do the brewery installation. What we do is support project management and support of those trades by talking through the work that's needed with reference to the manual with the trades. And many trades, you get 3 quotes for electrical installation. You have a chat on the phone over the document and explain, load into the Sparky's head exactly what needs to happen. And then they say, yeah, right, mate, I got it, no sweat. And then you'll get a quote that assumes that it's 3 days work for 2 guys, not 3 weeks work for 2 guys. So long story short, we go to site and we do installation support on every project, because it's just best for everybody. But what our business is supply of equipment. It just happens that we also do everything else that's involved in ensuring the customer's success. It's just that we don't charge money for consulting. We don't charge money for trade work. We don't charge, it's better for everybody if we focus on doing the best job we can of our little piece of the world, which is equipment and working with people so that they can use them successfully.
Right. And Julian, any advice that you can offer aspiring brewery owners when it comes to starting out and sourcing their equipment?
Yeah, for sure. People come to us with a mindset that which equipment they buy or where they pick a site is going to be the key success factor. And in fact, assuming that you get those correct, which is what we do, what's really important is selling beer. You might think that you're in the business of brewing beer, but in fact, what you're doing is selling beer. And it's ironic as an equipment supplier that the standard advice that I give people is about focusing on that. Pick the smallest number of the most important factors and make sure you get them right. In the cold light of day, 3 most important things in pro brewing are selling beer, and selling beer. And if you get those right, everything else takes care of itself. So I'm forever trying to take conversations away from all of the nitty-gritty detail around equipment design and selection, and getting people to focus on marketing and their brand and what the brand means in the consumer's mind. So it's, as I say, it's ironic being an engineer and equipment supplier, but some fair proportion of my work is about branding and marketing, which is fantastic. We, as we were discussing before, it's part of the strength of our industry that people can put their own spin on their business.
Yeah, well, I do have a segment that will be coming up later on in this podcast, where I've got some marketing and branding professionals talking about the importance of beer sales and how to sort of build a brand in this industry. And it's I think another forgotten aspect. When I first started on this sort of journey of figuring out how I'd go about building this brewery, I was so narrow focused on the equipment, but that's only a small part of it, isn't it? And there's so much in the back end, making the brand and the packaging and the sales points. If you don't concentrate on those, you're just going to be eventually a abandoned brewery with some fancy equipment in it.
The standard process, we have 2 customer journeys that we take people through. One's business mindset and one's craft brewer or brewer, craft beer culture mindset. And they have different interests and we talk to them in different ways. But you're dead right. When you step away and you look at the volume that you sell, that's usually people get stuck in limbo. They get lost in space for 6 months to a year, where they want quotes on equipment and they want to know how it's possible. They want to sort of understand how they would do it and they want to plan it and they want to step ahead, but they can't make an assumption about the level of sales. So I just say, well, look, jump on Spark Academy and download the template and calculate it. You can see clearly, you play around with your model. It's like budgeting for a business. The budget doesn't need to come to pass. It doesn't need to be an accurate forecast, but you do need to make an assumption. You do need to make a forecast. You can change it later. So I'm forever saying to people, hey, I can't give you an equipment quote until you can tell me how much beer you want. So you're dead right. And there's a few key things that, with site selection that I've seen go wrong. You definitely want to have a look at the utilities that are coming in terms of gas and power, and you want to have a look at the lease terms that you get. If you don't achieve planning permission to be able to brew there, you don't want to be stuck with a contractual obligation for a lease. So you'd sign a lease with an option, an option to cancel the lease if you don't achieve planning permission, DA, for what it is that you intend to do. It's worth putting back in the lap of the landlord a lot of the fit out works if the market's as it is at the moment, where it's a buyer's market for property. You can say, guys, here's my intention. I want to put a brewery in your building. Now, for me to do that, I need a long lease and I need a 6-month rent free and I need you to do the flooring, So a lot of great sites are in shopping centres where the fit out works is happening already, or new build. We add a lot of value on new build projects where we can do the engineering work with the client. That means that the brewery goes in without a whole second stage of fit out works even being needed. I think there's a few classic mistakes are made with access and flow and logistics. People just getting their head around the whether the site's suitable. They fall in love with the site in an emotional way, and they don't think practically. They just don't have an experience to be able to. I've seen people do all kinds of things with inappropriate site selection, or trying to shoehorn one kind of business into the wrong kind of site. So it's anyway, it's the benefit of working with people that have some amount of experience, that they can give you their thoughts on that as you step through that process yourself. And it is up to everybody to, as you say, do some soul searching and decide in advance what it is that they're trying to do before they do it.
And in a previous segment, we talked a bit about quality management. I had a PK from the Fifth Ingredient come on and talk about their brewery management software, B30, and very similar to other inventory management programs like eCOS and Unleashed, etc. Are you able to talk to us about some efficient ways breweries can best manage their production and ensure beer consistency, and any low cost or stress brewery management suggestions?
Yes, there's a lot that can be done. The quality and consistency, low stress, low cost, assurity. What we're talking about is standard operating procedures and professionalism. So what you might imagine being a brew log with a laboratory program for quality assurance and quality control, and it's an advantage that Spark gives to their clients, is the benefit of our experience and our documents relating to those things.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than work it out the hard way or never work it out or have to pay for consultancy, by starting on a Spark brewing system that has standard operating procedures that you can use, you get a really good starting point. Any brewing company will develop its own procedures to suit its own style and its own products. But the answer to your question is that there's a huge, we call it the long tail. There's a huge number of important aspects that come to pass during commissioning and during the ramp up into production that you don't want to learn by experience. You want to work with somebody who's an industry professional, has the experience in how to, owns a brewery. Because we're very hands on with everybody on our team being brewers and having the experience of brewing personally. There's an easy way and a hard way to do everything, and those procedures are the key to consistency and quality of beer, because to a really large extent, consistent beer is good beer. If you can repeat your beer and make the same beer, you can incrementally improve it. So you only need two things. You need taste and vision as to what you're trying to achieve with your beer, and consistency in being able to brew. And then all you need to do is rinse and repeat. It reminds me of that joke. What's the difference between a lawyer and an engineer? A lawyer makes a simple thing complicated, and an engineer makes a complicated thing simple. We live in a really simple world. Brewing is not rocket science. There's a small number of critical factors, these process control points, gravity and conversion and bittering and hop utilization, efficiency of the brew house, the pH, dissolved oxygen, carbonation level, temperature, obviously time and temperatures, and it's just, I think we live and breathe it, so we sort of forget to mention it. But yeah, brewing is a food process engineering. We're talking times and temperatures, heat transfer for fluid mechanics. And all the brewer needs to do is lock down the small number of those critical process control factors, record them, adjust, hit the numbers, repeat. So the record keeping is sort of an embodiment of an understanding of the process, a deep understanding of the complexity of the organic chemistry as to what's happening, but just making it simple. Yeah, it's beer. Let's not overcomplicate it. Obviously, cleanliness, sanitation is 80% of the job. Stuff has to be scrupulously clean, and that's easy with well-designed equipment.
Julian, you've mentioned a couple of times already about an online training webinar, is it, called Spark Academy? Is that correct?
Yeah, Spark Academy is just us gathering all of our thoughts over having built 50 breweries and putting them in one place to help people. We know what people go through when they plan a brewery, and we know what the options are they can choose from. And the Spark Academy on our Spark Brew website allows people to watch videos that are sort of fun and easy to watch, that just explains what's involved. And then they can download templates that allows them to do the planning work themselves. And that's come about because it's what I do with people through the year before they start a brew project anyway. But it just puts those tools at their disposal to allow them to do it in their own time and at their own pace. And it makes everyone's life easier because it answers a lot of their questions automatically. And it means that they know what they're looking for by the time, we sit down in person or meet with them by video and go through the details of their specific project.
And training has come up a couple of times. There's a lot more formal training out there for the brewing industry. How important is training to the brewing industry in your eyes for those that haven't actually got pro brewing experience wanting to start a brewery?
Well, like any trade, you need some theory and you need some practice. So you absolutely need hands-on experience. The courses that have started in Australia in the last few years are fantastic. We've built small pilot systems that are used for teaching at TAFE Queensland and UNSW and University of Queensland, DAF, various different state government or federal departments. And I like that because it sort of gives something back to the next generation, and people get the opportunity through those TAFE courses to get a qualification and get a toe in the door in the industry. So I think it's very important. It's a really important piece of the puzzle, having capable brewing skill in the economy. The hands-on training opportunities that Spark do personally has been really well received, because when people are interested in starting a brewery and looking at different machines, sometimes the easiest way for them to learn about a machine is to brew. So for them to have a chance to go to one of our sites, brew in our system and go home with their own beer puts them in a completely different planet of confidence. They've just closed out so many questions about how, why, whether, we find that that's just so confidence inspiring to people that it's super, super valuable.
Yeah, I remember that first time I did an all grain brew, and the lead up to it was so nerve wracking, like trying to just, as people can probably start to understand, I'm someone that needs to understand every single little bit of detail before I actually jump into it. That's why I'm doing a podcast. But the whole lead up, I think it was like a few months just leading up to, the process and how to go about and what to do next and what to avoid. And I can imagine doing that first commercial or professional brew would be just clear it all up for you, and it would just sink in a lot more.
Oh, that's completely the case. People are quite rightly nervous, or they just unsure about something they haven't done before, especially when there's large amounts of money involved. Yeah. And there's a lot of experts in our industry, but you'll find at the end of the day, the people that know the most are the people that are listening and not talking.
Yeah.
Down to character, personality as well.
Yeah.
Spark's style is to help people to find their own feet and to let them establish confidence through experience, rather than stand over them and wag their finger and tell them what they should be doing as an expert. It's just my personal style. It's not to say that I'm not uniquely positioned and knowledgeable about this in this country. It's just that my personal style is not to be dictatorial. We partner together with people shoulder to shoulder. I don't need the ego trip of being told that I'm a legendary guru. Instead, we work together with people for mutual benefit. And I think that's ethically appropriate. And I know from experience that in the long run, that's just best for everybody. So we really pride ourselves on our reputation, that the honor associated with having done a good job. There's a lot of people that have spun us backward out of our industry as equipment suppliers, and there are a lot that won't be here in 10 years' time. But I can tell you for sure that Spark will be, and will be an international business at that point, in the UK and America first, supplying our equipment through dealer agents. Yeah, and that's kind of relaxing and satisfying to me, that without any agitation and stress from competition, apparent competition. All I need to worry about is doing the right thing by our customers ethically and honourably, and that we'll get where we're going one foot after the other.
And I know we've focused a lot on the brewing aspect today, which obviously is the whole theme of the podcast, but what's the sort of percentage between breweries and distilleries that you work with? Do you have a sort of figure you can throw out there?
Under 10%. And the distilleries range falls into, again, a similar sort of two categories. Big production distilleries like Manly Spirits is a gorgeous facility. They sell a lot of gin and they're making and laying down a lot of whiskey. And then small plug and play 300 litre or 500 litre stills. And the spirit space is an interesting space technically for me, and because of the way flavour in spirits works. It's a fascinating technical area. I did a research trip to Europe to look at the white fruit brandy distilleries to understand what the best, just like you, Chris, I was trying to work out what the best way to do it is in a really engineering, rational, detailed way. And when you go to Europe, in each different part, in Switzerland and Alsace and Baden-Württemberg and parts of France, each location has a standout stellar performer who just does phenomenally high-end products. Each of them swears that their way is the only way to do it, and each of them does it completely differently. So I came back from that trip. I was trying to answer the question, is there a purpose for double distilling, and is it preferable to single distillation? And so I came back from that, having been to the old world with this, continental European kind of philosophical learning that, in fact, if you care a huge amount about what you do, that's more important than the specifics of how you do it.
Yeah. Well, moving into some of the industry insights, and I always like to get a guest's opinion on the current state and the future outlook of the brewing industry. But rather than talking about beer trends and so forth, you've been in that equipment space for the brewing industry. Are you able to tell us about any new and exciting equipment that might be coming onto the market that, might improve automation, improve efficiencies, etc.?
Oh, for sure. I think the sort of powerful and gentle heating system that we've brought to market recently will proceed and scale. You'll see more of that. The digital control that we were the first in Australia to champion a while ago just makes a lot of sense because it costs a little bit more, but it allows you automation benefits and it makes it cheaper to expand. You can clip tanks in much more easily. I think micro canning will come forward, and the cost and the practicality of packaging for that additional revenue stream of slinging slabs. That's a huge win. If you're in a brew pub and you're busy on a Saturday night, but people are carrying slabs away too, it's a phenomenal additional revenue stream. Technically, in terms of what will happen next, I think these business models that involve direct to consumer selling online and brew and serve on site, even though it's simple technically, tank to tap, which again we instigated many years ago, is a real win. To be able to serve direct to draft tap from your own tank. When a customer walks in the door, and we often stack serving bright tanks on top of fermenters, and it looks good, minimises the space. When somebody walks in the door to your brew pub and they see a huge shiny pipe coming from the tank and going to the draft tap, there's nothing you need to explain to them. It just clicks in their mind. It doesn't matter how much they know or care about the technicality of brewing, they get it straight away. So I love that kind of simple tech that communicates the process and the brewery's reality to the consumer and acts like a marketing magnet, as well as being very, very practical. You just take out the capital of needing to keg washer and kegs. You take out a huge amount of floor space of cool room. And the beer's never seen light, never seen heat, never seen oxygen. Fresh beer is good beer straight from the tank.
I've had another guest on, I think it might have been John from Bespoke, who talked about, some of those new thermal technologies for heating brew houses. It's sort of like rather than steam and direct fire or electric, it's a thermal type heating application. Is that what you were talking about earlier there about the thermal heating?
The compact Spark systems use a low pressure jacketed heating system that gives the benefit of steam, but without needing steam. Right. And it does away with some of the localized overheating aspects that you get with direct electric heating. Here's the thing, people, they discount out of hand direct electric. as if you can't do it or you shouldn't do it. In fact, if you actually engineer a system, you can do away with some of those compromises by putting in big, low power density, lazy elements and a thing called a phase controller, which again, it's not the cheapest way to do it, just switching it on and switching it off. But a phase controller shifts the three-phase power phases relative to one another to continuously modulate the power. So if you set 70%, Chris, say 50%, it actually gives you 50% power to the elements. So the peak surface temperature is minimized. The standard cheap way of doing things is put in a small high power density element that gets very hot on its surface and then control it on a duty cycle where if you set 50% power, it'll be on half the time, off half the time. And obviously while it's on, it gets very, very hot. So people complain, or they'll say, I don't want this or I don't want that. A lot of brewers say, I want steam because it's the best. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you actually had an engineer design and build you a system, direct electric, even on a 15 hec, would be absolutely fine. And they are. We run tons of them. So I'm not an absolutist about a particular method because I'm not an equipment salesman. I design machines that suit the application perfectly. And I do away with all those kind of compromises by good design.
And talking, I guess, a bit about the craft beer industry or even the beer industry in general in Australia, any thoughts on the future outlook of it?
It's a good place to be, the beer industry. It's recession resistant. It's disgusting but true that people drink more in recessions, And
yeah, we're learning that, yeah.
Food and beverage, it's not going anywhere. It's only going one direction. And while people might say there's increasing competition and I have clear business models, this brew and serve on site, where it has not even started. Look at it this way. The most advanced beer economy in the world is North America. And in the USA, the fastest growing route to market for beer is beer that's sold where it's brewed. Now that channel to market, and we're talking brew pubs and tap rooms, the beer that's sold where it's brewed is still under 1% of the American beer market. So in the most advanced beer economy in the world, what we cater to and what we specialize in here at Spark has not even begun. I can only see great things.
And what's that sort of percentage look like, if you're able to tell us, here in Australia? Like, is it, because you tend to only know about, the big, well, not the big boys, but the ones that are sort of in the bottle shops, don't you? If you're not in that local area, you tend not to know what brew pubs are going around. You know what I mean? You only tend to know what's in cans and in bottle shops. But is the brew pub model in Australia starting to become a very popular thing?
Big time. Absolutely is, because it's so low risk. It's unfuck-upable is the term bandied around far too often these days. But if you want to open a brew pub and do a solid, decent job, you can't go wrong. It's a very low risk. Whereas making an assumption about distribution sales volume, borrowing a whole lot of money to employ lots of salespeople and hoping that you can win enough accounts to be able to achieve that volume is just intrinsically much riskier.
Yeah.
So yeah, indeed, for all kinds of reasons, I think retail brewing is savvy. And I don't have really great data on the proportion, but it's a drop in the water. The Australian economy is an economy of duopolies, typically. So in any industry, there's a relatively, you would say as economists, high concentration ratio. That the majority of the market is controlled by a small number of companies. And in Australia, 95% roughly of beer is owned by two foreign global FMCG manufacturers, both of them Japanese at the moment, actually.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, when your question is what proportion of beer is sold in brew pubs, and it's tiny, it's infinitesimal. And rather than us see ourselves as competitors, one reason I like the industry is that there's a nice collegiate, supportive kind of attitude. Yep. There's so much to be gained by communicating with people to give them better, more interesting choices about beer and its provenance and where it comes from, and engaging them in the process and the flavors there. There's so much to be gained by doing that it's better to focus on that than it is to be worrying about competition in the market.
All right. Well, I really do appreciate your time, Julian, and spending a good hour with us and sharing some insights about the equipment aspect. And listen, we talked a lot about other things around the equipment. Obviously, the theme of today's episode is, the equipment is not everything. It's only a small part. I mean, there's a lot of other things you need to get right, not just the equipment side of things. And it was good that we were able to talk about some of those aspects. But any closing thoughts and advice you'd like to, I guess, part ways with?
Well, If somebody's considering starting a brewery, I would advise them to do it, because it gives you a chance to actualize in life, and you don't get that chance that often. Most people don't realize what their life could have been if they had some control and some autonomy. So my parting advice is, if you think you would like to own a pro brewery, that you should do it.
That's a point that I've brought up before as well, is people have listened to the introduction to this podcast know that I work in the recruitment space, and the product I sell for a living is human beings, and I have very limited control over them. They let you down time and time again. Sometimes they surprise you and you get some great satisfaction from what you do. But I think if I know how to make beer and I follow a process and I've got good quality management controls in place, I know that I'm not going to disappoint a customer. I've got a lot more control over it. And that's what interests me about wanting to go and do something like this.
It is very satisfying, and you're quite right. You kind of go from strength to strength. We talk a lot about the second summer in business, and that's what we shoot for. People tend to shoot for the launch date in the first year, and we say, guys, let's set ourselves up for success here. And we talk about this second summer where you really get not just the commercial benefit, but as you're talking about, the kind of emotional actualizations, like life satisfaction from your vocation. That really comes in that second summer onward, when the stress and the work of the startup's out of the way and you're in business. That's what we like.
No, I am looking forward to those days. So
it's been a pleasure, very interesting and fun chatting. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Once again, appreciate coming on. Anything else that you'd like to plug? Services, maybe some special offers, events coming up for you guys at Spark?
Oh, nothing beyond just hit us up for Spark Academy content that's interesting and helpful, and the Spark stories, and let us know what you're planning. We're always interested to hear people's thoughts on what they'd like to do and see how we can help.
And for the audience, I'll be leaving a couple of links in the show notes about some of those that we've talked about. Obviously, the website and the Spark Academy training web address, so people can go to those links and check that out. But once again, Julian, I appreciate you coming on the Build Me a Brewery podcast.
No problem. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 3 of the brewery equipment sourcing segment. Part 4 of the segment, I talked to Gavin Van Vuren from Synergy Custom Solutions based up in Queensland. As always, if you are liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au, and much more complimentary content will be coming your way if you sign up to our mailing list. I'm Chris Ayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.